Let me tell you something the world isn't ready to hear, but you are. Right now, something is happening in Pakistan that nobody can stop. Not the media, not the critics, not the doubters. A storm is rising, a force is building, and it's not driven by noise or fear. It's driven by destiny. You can feel it. It's not in the headlines yet, but it's in the atmosphere. A shift, a turning point. And believe me, when Pakistan wakes up fully, emotionally, spiritually, strategically, there will be no force on earth that can stop it. None. Now, here's the truth. You don't become a superpower by crying about the past. You don't rise by pointing fingers. That's what weak nations do. That's what controlled minds do. You rise by breaking the chains of emotional slavery. You rise by walking away from the need to be liked, to be pitied, to be rescued. And you step into strength, into silence, into certainty. You see, power doesn't belong to the loud. It belongs to the clear, the spiritually clear, the emotionally unmoved. The ones who don't flinch when challenged, who don't collapse when ignored, who don't bend when the world turns its back. That's the spirit rising in Pakistan, and that's why I'm telling you, this nation, this people, this land, is being shaped into a superpower before our eyes, not just politically, not just economically, spiritually, because there's purpose here, deep purpose. The world respects power, but power is not yelling. Power is restraint. Power is precision. When the enemy shouts, a powerful nation doesn't scream back. It builds in silence. Pakistan must master that art. The art of building quietly, building with vision, building with the hand of God over its heart. No more emotional outbursts, no more spiritual confusion. That era is over. The new era, it belongs to the focused, to the unwavering, to those who don't explain but execute. And I want you to hear this. When a nation learns to detach emotionally from insult, injustice, and even praise, it becomes dangerous. Not in a chaotic way, in a controlled, divine way. When Pakistan stops reacting, it will start creating. And when it creates, the world will pay attention. Not because it begged for it, because it earned it. You see, spiritual detachment is the foundation of national resurrection. When you're no longer triggered, you're no longer trapped. When you're no longer desperate for approval, you're finally qualified for leadership. Pakistan has been overlooked because it kept reacting, but now it must remember who it is. The strength is already there. The fire, the brilliance, the innovation, it's all waiting. It just needs one thing: emotional discipline. When the soul is stable, the nation is unstoppable. People talk about resources. Yes, Pakistan has those: minerals, manpower, youth. But let me tell you, those are not the greatest assets. The greatest asset is the spirit of the people. And when that spirit is purified from fear and distraction, you birth something the world has never seen before. A nation that bows only to God, that listens more than it speaks, that acts more than it complains, that gives more than it begs. That, my friends, is a superpower. You must understand this. Attachment to weakness is a choice. Detachment from weakness is the beginning of authority. You can't beg the world to respect you and expect them to do it. You must carry yourself in a way that demands it, not with arrogance, with clarity, with conviction, with calm. When your soul is quiet, your impact is loud. And here's the revelation: the enemy of Pakistan is not just outside, it's the chaos within. The doubt, the fear, the addiction to being right, the emotional addiction to pain. Let it go, let it burn. A new people must rise, people who aren't easily moved, who can look at threats and stay still, who can hear criticism and remain focused. That's when the earth begins to shake. That's when history shifts. That's when kings rise and empires fall. And Pakistan, mark my words, is being positioned for that kind of moment. So stop chasing validation, start building. Stop crying over the past. Start designing the future. Stop reacting emotionally, start leading spiritually. That's how you win. That's how nations rise. That's how superpowers are born, through detachment, focus, and divine confidence. The world isn't ready, but Pakistan is. A nation becomes powerful when its people stop reacting emotionally and start responding with vision. This isn't just a slogan, it's a spiritual law. Emotion is a tool, but when it becomes the master, the people become servants to chaos. History doesn't remember the most emotional nations. It remembers the most focused ones. It remembers those who had a blueprint, those who didn't collapse when provoked, and those who understood that noise is not strategy. When a country is led by emotional impulses, every insult becomes a crisis, every disagreement becomes a war, and every delay becomes despair. That is not strength. That is instability disguised as passion. Real power is measured by the ability to hold back when you're tempted to explode. It is the ability to see through the fog of the moment and act from the clarity of purpose. A nation with vision does not fall for bait. It doesn't chase headlines. It creates legacy. When people are reactive, they are easily manipulated. When people are emotionally triggered, they cannot plan. You cannot build a superpower with offended minds and wounded hearts. You build it with clarity, restraint, long-term thinking, and most importantly, spiritual discipline. This is where Pakistan must evolve. The people must rise above the constant need to prove themselves to a world that has already made up its mind. Stop trying to be understood. Stop trying to be accepted. Start becoming undeniable. The world doesn't respond to explanations. It responds to execution. When a nation stops explaining and starts executing, the tables turn. The critics get silent, the enemies grow nervous, the allies start paying attention, and that only happens when the people trade emotional reactivity for strategic movement. Vision is what separates power from noise. It's what transforms pain into policy, wounds into wisdom, and setbacks into platforms. Vision is the inner fire that doesn't need a crowd to stay lit. It's the reason behind the silence, the calm in the storm, the patience that builds when everyone else is panicking. When a nation taps into that level of awareness, its power becomes magnetic. It doesn't need to announce its rise. It becomes visible without saying a word. And here's the real truth. Emotional detachment doesn't mean apathy. It means alignment. It means refusing to let feelings govern decisions. It means refusing to let enemies write the script. When people are trained to stay calm under pressure, they become architects of a new world. And when the people of Pakistan step into this mentality, not just a few leaders, but the collective spirit, then you will see transformation on a national level. Because in that moment, the nation will no longer be chasing power, it will become power. Detachment from weakness is the beginning of strength. Until a nation learns to let go of the behaviors, beliefs, and emotional patterns that keep it small, it can never rise to its true potential. Weakness is not just poverty or lack of infrastructure, it's the mindset that tolerates those things as permanent. Weakness hides in the excuses, the self-pity, the fear of change, the addiction to being saved by others. And as long as a nation clings to those, no amount of money, aid, or opportunity will make it great. True transformation begins the moment you say enough, not just emotionally, but spiritually. Detachment from weakness is a decision to rise, not someday, but now. Strength is not just military might or economic leverage. It is the internal refusal to be defined by struggle. When a nation continues to replay its history of loss, betrayal, and colonial damage without stepping beyond it, it becomes emotionally trapped. It begins to identify more with pain than with possibility. Detachment is the bold, unapologetic choice to stop worshiping wounds. Yes, the pain was real. Yes, the injustice was real. But when a nation defines itself by what was done to it, it will always look backward, and you cannot move forward while looking in the rearview mirror. Pakistan must detach from the identity of being misunderstood, ignored, and underestimated, because that mindset, while it may feel righteous, keeps the nation small. The energy of victimhood may create unity in the short term, but it will never create vision. It will never create innovation. It will never create legacy. You cannot build a superpower by nursing old injuries. You build it by walking with your head high and your soul clean. That means letting go of every belief that says you are not ready, not worthy, or not capable. Weakness is subtle. It shows up in how you speak about your own country. It hides in phrases like, we can't do it without help, or nobody supports us. That language is poisoned. It robs a nation of its divine assignment. Because once you believe you are helpless, you begin to act helpless. Detachment begins by changing the way you speak, the way you see yourself, and the way you interpret your own history. It's about understanding that everything that broke you was also shaping you. And now you don't need to carry the pain anymore. You just need to carry the lesson. The people of Pakistan must release every emotional attachment to inferiority. Stop comparing, stop copying, start creating, stop reacting, start responding, stop waiting for approval, start moving with purpose. A superpower is not declared, it is demonstrated, and that demonstration begins in the minds and spirits of the people. When you detach from weakness, you stop negotiating your greatness. You stop diluting your fire to make others comfortable. You stop apologizing for existing, and that's when power arrives. Not as noise, not as arrogance, but as quiet, immovable confidence. That is the seed of strength, and that is where the rise begins. The world doesn't hand over power, it recognizes power when it's unapologetically displayed. Power is never gifted to those who beg for it, nor to those who wait patiently in the shadows hoping to be discovered. It is seized by those who walk with certainty, who operate with discipline, and who carry themselves as if the crown is already theirs. Nations are no different than individuals in this regard. If you want the world to respect you, fear you, or follow your lead, you must first embody that level of self-respect and direction. Nobody announces your rise. You do, and you do it by showing the world what you are made of through action, not explanation. Pakistan has long asked for recognition, long pleaded to be seen for its potential, but that time has passed. This is no longer an era of waiting, it is an era of proving. If the world hasn't acknowledged your strength, then it's time to stop asking and start showing. Real power doesn't introduce itself. It walks into the room and changes the atmosphere. When a nation begins to move with this kind of self-assurance, not arrogance, but divine confidence, things begin to shift. Markets respond. Leaders listen. Enemies reconsider. That's the power of unapologetic presence. But understand this clearly, the world is not moved by desperation. It is moved by demonstration. You don't need to convince anyone of your greatness. You need to live it out. You don't need to demand a seat at the table. You need to build your own table and make the world want to sit at it. This requires emotional maturity, spiritual clarity, and strategic discipline. It means being unmoved by delay, unshaken by criticism, and undistracted by noise. When you display power, not in tantrums, but in calculated decisions, not in speeches, but in results, not in threats, but in undeniable progress, the world responds differently. Suddenly, the same voices that dismissed you will seek your partnership. The same platforms that ignored you will start quoting you. But none of that happens until you carry yourself as the authority you were destined to be. Power is not given to the polite. It is attracted to the bold. Pakistan must stop seeking permission to rise. You don't need permission to be powerful. You need purpose. You need precision. You need to remember who you are. And once you do, you must walk as if the world is already watching, because soon it will be. Every nation that rose to greatness did so not by waiting, but by moving forward with unshakable intent, by choosing not to bow to fear, by choosing not to retreat when challenged, by choosing to shine even when ignored. This is how empires are built. This is how legacies are written. The moment you stop asking to be seen and start being undeniable, that's when the world begins to recognize who you truly are. And Pakistan is not meant to be tolerated. It's meant to be seen, felt, and remembered. Real leaders aren't desperate, they're determined. Desperation is loud, reckless, unstable. It rushes decisions, pleads for validation, and reacts out of fear of losing. Determination, on the other hand, is composed. It is grounded in vision. It speaks with authority, not insecurity. It moves with patience, not panic. The difference is everything. A desperate nation will sell its soul for short-term applause. A determined nation will build in silence until the whole world has no choice but to take notice. That is the path forward for Pakistan, not to chase global sympathy, but to walk with sovereign strength. When leaders act out of desperation, they compromise values, they chase short-term deals, They abandon long-term vision for quick wins that rarely serve the people. But when leadership is born out of deep spiritual certainty, it cannot be manipulated, it cannot be pressured, and it cannot be bought. Determined leadership understands timing. It knows when to strike and when to step back. It doesn't need to shout to prove strength. It becomes a force that speaks through action. Desperation always asks, how can we survive? Determination declares, this is how we thrive. One begs for support, the other builds without it. When a people, a government, or a movement acts from desperation, the results are always unstable. It creates cycles of dependency, and dependency always leads to compromise. But determination is rooted in self-trust. It knows the value of the vision. It doesn't panic when others walk away. It stays on course, even when nobody's watching. Pakistan must detach itself from the energy of desperation, the need to prove, the constant chase for validation, the emotional reactivity to being underestimated. None of that builds a superpower. It is a distraction. You don't rise by responding to every critic. You rise by doing what critics cannot. You rise by building, and that building requires determined hearts, not desperate ones. It requires leaders who are not swayed by applause or rejection, who don't crumble when ignored, who don't trade legacy for comfort. A determined leader can walk into a room full of enemies and still own the space, because the strength isn't in the crowd, it's in the conviction. Desperation is externally focused. Determination is internally rooted. One is constantly looking outside for permission. The other already has permission from within. This is the difference between nations that collapse under pressure and nations that rise because of it. Pakistan has everything it needs to become great. The question is no longer about potential. It's about posture. It's about how we carry ourselves in the face of adversity. Will we panic when ignored, or will we persist with purpose? Will we beg for inclusion, or will we prepare for dominance? The world has seen enough desperation. It's looking for leaders, for nations, for movements that cannot be shaken. That's what determination looks like. Quiet, steady, unstoppable. When Pakistan embraces that posture, the rise will no longer be a dream. It will be inevitable. Emotional control is not passivity. It's calculated focus. Too often people mistake calmness for weakness or silence for surrender. But the opposite is true. The strongest minds are not the ones that react to every insult, every threat, or every challenge. The strongest are those who can stand in the middle of chaos and remain unmoved, not because they don't feel, but because they've mastered the art of discipline. When you control your emotions, you control outcomes. You no longer play someone else's game. You become the one who sets the tempo. A nation that lacks emotional discipline will always be led by provocation. It will spend more time reacting than building. It will chase headlines instead of history. And in that frenzy, it will lose its identity, its dignity, and its direction. This is how great potential is wasted, when the energy of the people is constantly being drained by emotional triggers, rage, offense, fear, pride. These emotions are easily manipulated. They can make a strong people act weak and a wise nation act foolish. The key is not to suppress emotion, but to master it. Calculated focus means you don't move just because someone else moved. It means you don't respond just because someone poked at your pride. You respond because it aligns with your mission. You speak because there's something worth saying. You act because you've counted the cost. This is the kind of leadership, the kind of thinking that builds empires. Not every battle is worth fighting. Not every enemy is worth engaging. Sometimes the most powerful move is no move at all. For Pakistan to rise, it must train its people to respond, not react. The media may provoke, foreign voices may criticize, economic pressure may build, but if the people know who they are, if the nation is rooted in purpose, it cannot be swayed. Emotional control becomes national strength. It is the armor of clarity. The world respects those who are not easily moved, because stillness under fire is the sign of power. Not the loudest voice, but the quietest mind in the room is often the one with the most control. This principle is not new, it's ancient. Kings, prophets, and warriors throughout history have understood that true dominance comes from inner mastery. A calm soul is not a weak soul. It is a soul that has chosen its priorities. And for a nation like Pakistan, with its youth, its spirit, its passion, emotional mastery will be the turning point. When that passion is no longer wasted on petty arguments or reactive anger, and instead channeled into innovation, leadership, and self-reliance, the world will see a force it cannot ignore. Calculated focus means playing the long game. It means letting go of the need to always be heard, always be right, always be vindicated. Sometimes your silence is your power. Sometimes your refusal to fight is your loudest message. And when a nation learns this, not just its leaders, but its people, it becomes impossible to manipulate, impossible to break. Because now it's not just reacting to the world, it's reshaping it. A spiritually awakened nation is an unstoppable force because God's hand is with the fearless. This is not just a poetic statement, it is a law of divine order. When a people begin to awaken to the reality of who they are in the eyes of the Creator, they stop bowing to man, they stop fearing loss, they stop negotiating their worth. Spiritual awakening is the moment a nation looks beyond politics, beyond money, beyond borders, and remembers its divine assignment. It is the moment when purpose replaces confusion and conviction overrides fear. The world is filled with nations that are rich in resources but poor in identity. Without spiritual awakening, even the most powerful infrastructure crumbles under pressure. But when a people awaken to their calling, when they understand that they are not here by accident, but by divine design, everything begins to shift. Their walk changes, their speech changes, their goals change. They stop merely surviving and start shaping the future. Because spiritual clarity is the highest form of national intelligence. It produces unity, courage, and vision that no enemy can destroy. Fear is the enemy of destiny. And when fear governs a nation, compromise becomes normal, silence becomes survival, cowardice becomes wisdom. But fear is a lie, and spiritual awakening is the antidote. When the soul of a nation is awakened and sees through the deception, it no longer chases validation from powers that never intended to support it. It no longer submits to systems that feed it just enough to keep it dependent. A spiritually awakened Pakistan will not ask for permission to lead. It will lead because it was born to. This kind of awakening doesn't come through speeches or slogans. It comes when hearts turn inward and upward. It comes when people recognize that divine power does not favor the proud or the passive. It favors the fearless, not the reckless, but the righteous, those who stand for truth, for justice, for purpose, no matter the cost. Fearless doesn't mean unafraid. It means more loyal to truth than to fear, and God always backs the fearless. Pakistan has always carried spiritual depth in its DNA. The soil itself is drenched in sacrifice, prayer, and resilience. But that spiritual inheritance must be reawakened. It must rise again, not in mere rituals, but in national consciousness. A people who know their connection to God cannot be ruled by lies. They cannot be broken by pressure. They cannot be enslaved by foreign influence, because now they are guided by something higher. When a nation is spiritually awake, it begins to create its own reality. It no longer waits for others to define it. It becomes the voice, not the echo. It becomes the example, not the follower. That is the future that awaits Pakistan, not just to be powerful in military or economy, but to be grounded in divine wisdom. Because when God finds a nation unafraid to rise, he breathes life into it. And once he does, nothing can stop it. Not the past, not the pressure, not the world, nothing. When people stop begging for validation, they start creating destiny. Begging is the language of limitation. It signals to the world that you do not yet know who you are. It reveals a soul that is still waiting for permission to move, to lead, to rise. Validation. But while it may feel like support, often becomes a chain. Because when you need to be seen before you believe in yourself, you've already given someone else power over your identity. Nations, just like individuals, cannot fulfill their destiny while still asking the world for approval. True creators don't beg, they build. They don't wait for applause to begin their mission. They begin because the mission itself is enough. When a person or a people wake up to their purpose, the hunger for validation dies. It no longer matters who claps. What matters is the assignment. What matters is the future that must be created. And that future doesn't come from external praise. It comes from internal alignment. A nation like Pakistan must stop asking to be acknowledged and start being undeniable. The hunger to be seen is dangerous. It distorts judgment. It delays progress. It makes leaders sell out long-term purpose for short-term visibility. But destiny is not built on being seen. It's built on being true. When people shift their focus from being accepted to being effective, everything changes. They stop performing and start producing. They stop explaining and start executing. That is when the tide turns. That is when power begins to emerge. Pakistan has long been overlooked, underestimated, and misunderstood. But none of that matters if the people rise with clarity, if the people stop measuring their worth by international headlines and start measuring it by divine assignment. You don't need the world to agree with your potential. You just need to manifest it. When the foundation is purpose, not praise, the structure lasts longer. It stands through storms because it was never built for attention. It was built for impact. Begging is an emotional state. It is born from insecurity, from a belief that you need someone else to confirm your greatness. But destiny is not a negotiation. It is a declaration. And once a nation begins to declare who it is and where it's going, it doesn't need to scream. It just moves. It builds. It multiplies. And soon the world will have no choice but to watch. Pakistan must embrace this posture, not with arrogance, but with certainty. The certainty that says we don't need to be validated. We were created to lead. That mindset produces innovation. It creates excellence. It strengthens the soul of a people. And that strength cannot be borrowed, bought, or begged for. It must be owned. Because once you own who you are, once you stop apologizing for your presence, you become a force. Destiny is not something you wait for. It's something you walk into. But only the ones who let go of the need to be liked can fully embrace it. And the moment a people no longer chase validation, they begin to create a future so powerful it speaks for itself. True confidence doesn't come from money or weapons. It comes from divine alignment and purpose. You can fill a nation with gold, stack it with missiles, and build cities that touch the sky. But if the soul of that nation is insecure, it will still tremble in the face of uncertainty. The confidence built on material strength is fragile. It only lasts as long as the money flows or the weapons remain untouched. But confidence rooted in divine purpose is unbreakable. It cannot be bought, imitated, or defeated because it flows from identity, not resource. A nation aligned with purpose knows who it is. It doesn't need to shout to prove its worth. It doesn't react to every threat because it operates from a place of clarity. When you're aligned with a divine mission, you stop looking for validation and you start moving with conviction. Confidence becomes quiet, deep, and immovable. It becomes the foundation for greatness. The world has seen many wealthy nations collapse under pressure while spiritually grounded ones have risen from the dust. Why? Because money and might may build walls, but only purpose builds legacy. Pakistan must understand this at its core. The strength of this nation will not come from how much it can borrow or buy, but from how deeply it can connect to its assignment. There is a calling on this land, a unique and undeniable one, but that calling cannot be fulfilled while chasing foreign models or competing in someone else's race. Confidence comes when a people know their path and walk it unapologetically. That's the difference between surviving and leading. A nation with divine alignment doesn't panic in crisis. It plans, it listens, it adjusts, because it understands that storms are not signs of failure, they're tests of faith. Confidence is what allows a people to endure without losing vision. It's what makes them rise again, even when counted out. It's what builds a national character that cannot be manipulated by propaganda or fear. And that confidence doesn't come from external power. It comes from interconnection. Purpose is not about pride, it's about direction. When a people understand why they exist, they stop comparing themselves to others. They stop copying trends and start creating culture. They stop reacting to pressure and start responding with clarity. This is what real power looks like, not noise, not display, but deep, undeniable presence. It's felt in the decisions a nation makes and how it treats its people and how it stands for its values, even when inconvenient. If Pakistan wants to rise, it must dig deeper, not into its pockets, but into its purpose. Because once the nation discovers who it truly is, confidence will come naturally. It will not need to be manufactured. It will radiate through every institution, every citizen, every act of leadership. That kind of confidence cannot be shaken. And once it takes root, no force on earth will be able to stop what's coming next. History is rewritten by those who are detached from fear and attached to vision. The world remembers the ones who moved forward when everyone else stood still. It remembers the people who saw something that didn't yet exist and chose to build it anyway. Fear has never shaped the future. Only vision has. But vision requires a powerful kind of detachment, the ability to let go of fear, doubt, and the comfort of conformity, because the ones who rewrite history are not the ones who waited for approval. They are the ones who moved with divine clarity, even when it cost them everything. Fear is the oldest form of control. It paralyzes nations, silences leaders, and crushes creativity before it even begins. When a nation is bound by fear, it becomes reactive, small-minded, and stuck in survival. But when a nation detaches from fear, a new level of boldness begins to rise. And it's not recklessness, it's vision. Vision is the antidote to fear. When you know where you're going, the voices that say you can't no longer matter. When you're committed to what must be built, the obstacles become stepping stones, not walls. Pakistan must choose vision over fear, not someday now, because the people who will lead the future are already preparing in silence. They are the ones who are tired of being stuck in cycles of limitation, tired of the fear that says stay in line or don't stand out. The next chapter of history won't be written by the cautious. It will be written by the courageous, but courage without vision is chaos. So the call is not just to be brave, it's to be focused. When you detach from fear, you stop worshiping failure. You stop rehearsing everything that could go wrong and start investing in what could go right. You stop building policies around insecurity and start creating movements around destiny. And that's when nations change. That's when institutions transform. That's when ordinary people become builders of legacy. And it doesn't require perfection. It requires clarity. It requires people who are more loyal to the future than they are to their fear. To rewrite history, you must be willing to be misunderstood. You must be willing to stand alone. You must be willing to let go of what feels safe in order to pursue what feels true. That's how empires fall and new ones rise, not through chance, but through choice. And that choice starts within. When a people decide that fear no longer has the final word, everything begins to shift. The world starts to feel it, even before it can explain it, because spiritual momentum is always louder than political noise. Pakistan has the vision. It has the heart. Now it must release the fear of failing, the fear of being judged, the fear of taking up space. Because when fear is removed from the equation, all that remains is power. Power to design, power to lead, power to rewrite what was once written by others. That is how new history is born. And Pakistan is ready. If you cannot be moved emotionally, you cannot be moved strategically, and that is the mark of future greatness. Emotional stability is not just a personal virtue, it is a national asset. It is what separates those who are easily manipulated from those who shape the future. When a person or a nation is constantly swayed by emotion, by offense, by fear, by anger, they become predictable. And what is predictable is always controllable. But the moment emotional detachment takes root, control breaks, the game changes, because now you're no longer playing from the heart of reaction, you're playing from the throne of wisdom. To be unmoved emotionally doesn't mean to be numb. It means to be governed by a higher authority, by vision, by strategy, by purpose. The greatest leaders in history were not cold, they were composed. They were not immune to emotion, but they were not ruled by it. They knew when to speak and when to be silent, when to engage and when to withdraw. This emotional control gave them strategic leverage because their enemies could not provoke them into destruction. They were not predictable, and that unpredictability made them powerful. Pakistan must understand this truth. As a nation, it has endured pressure, criticism, betrayal, and hardship, but endurance is not enough. There must now be elevation into emotional sovereignty, because when a people are no longer triggered, they become untouchable. When the hearts of the people are calm, focused, and determined, no attack can shake their foundations. No media narrative can distort their truth. No threat can distract them from their mission. The art of war on the battlefield in diplomacy and economics is psychological. Those who win are not always the strongest in numbers or wealth. They are the ones who stay centered under pressure, the ones who do not let fear dictate their choices, the ones who do not chase revenge, but instead invest in building. That is real power. It is the kind of power that doesn't boast, but always wins. It wins because it cannot be provoked, cannot be baited, and cannot be broken. Emotional detachment is not withdrawal from reality. It is full engagement with reality through the lens of clarity. You see what others don't. You hear beyond the noise. You respond with weight, not with whim. And because of that, you move differently. You create differently. You lead differently. Nations led by emotionally reactive minds are always one mistake away from collapse. But a nation led by focused, spiritually grounded, emotionally intelligent minds becomes immovable. This is what Pakistan must step into: the maturity of silence, the wisdom of restraint, the clarity of purpose. No more chasing reactions, no more giving power to critics. The future does not belong to the reactive. It belongs to the discipline. The moment a nation becomes emotionally immovable, it becomes strategically invincible. That is when greatness is no longer a dream, it becomes a destiny unfolding in real time. And now the message is clear. Pakistan will not rise by accident. It will rise by intention. It will rise not through noise, but through discipline, not through reaction, but through revelation. This is not a dream anymore. It is a decision to detach from weakness, from fear, from the hunger for validation, a decision to walk in emotional mastery, spiritual clarity, and national purpose. The world may not be ready, but Pakistan must be, because history does not wait for permission. It bows to the prepared. The time for excuses is over. The time for begging is over. The time for reacting is over. This is the hour of becoming, of remembering, of rising, not with noise, but with unshakable stillness, not with desperation, but with divine determination, not to impress the world, but to fulfill a destiny written by heaven itself. The future is not something to wait for. It is something to claim. And Pakistan, stand up, step forward, and claim it, because the world's next superpower is not coming. It's already here.